Thank you. Gentleman yields back. Today we are joined by Kimberly Cheatle, who was sworn into office on September 17, 2022 as the Director of the United States Secret Service. Prior to her appointment, Director Cheatle was Senior Director of Global Security at PepsiCo. Before her role at Pepsi, she served 27 years in the Secret Service. Pursuant to Committee Rule 9G, the witness will please stand and raise her right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony that you are about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Let the record show that the witness answered in the affirmative. Thank you. We certainly appreciate you being here today and look forward to your testimony. We normally limit testimony to opening statement to 5 minutes, but take all the time that you need. Obviously, the rules that we will abide by. When you're finished with your statement, we will then turn to questions. Each member will have 5 minutes. And just a note to the members, I'm going to strictly adhere to the 5 minutes. Once 5 minutes is up, I will hit the gavel. If the director is in the process of answering a question, we'll certainly let her finish her answers, and then we will move on. We're going to have about 100% attendance here today, plus a few additional add-ons. So this will be a very lengthy hearing, and we want to make sure every member gets their 5 minutes uninterrupted to be able to ask these important questions in this very bipartisan hearing today. I now recognize Director Cheatle for your opening statement.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman Comer, Ranking Member Raskin, and distinguished members of the committee. My name is Kimberly Cheatle, and I am the Director of the United States Secret Service. I appreciate the opportunity to appear before you today. The assassination attempt of former President Donald Trump on July 13th is the most significant operational failure of the Secret Service in decades, and I am keeping him and his family in my thoughts. I would like to offer my sincerest condolences to the family of Corey Comparator, a former fire chief and a hero who was killed in this senseless shooting. I would also like to acknowledge those who were injured in Butler, David Dutch and James Copenhagen, and I wish them a speedy recovery. I would be remiss if I did not also extend my condolences on the passing of your colleague, Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee. Ms. Jackson Lee was always engaged in the oversight of the Secret Service, and her passing is a great loss to this body. The Secret Service's solemn mission is to protect our nation's leaders. On July 13th, we failed. As a Director of the United States Secret Service, I take full responsibility for any security lapse of our agency. We are fully cooperating with ongoing investigations. We must learn what happened, and I will move heaven and earth to ensure that an incident like July 13th does not happen again. Let me state unequivocally, nothing I have said should be interpreted to place blame for this failure on our federal, state, or local law enforcement partners who supported the Secret Service in Butler. We could not do our job without them. We rely on the relationships built over years of working together to secure events and conduct investigations. Our agents, officers, and support personnel understand that every day we are expected to sacrifice our lives to execute a no-fail mission. As witnessed on July 13th, our special agents shielded former President Trump with their own bodies on stage while shots were being fired. Selflessly willing to make the ultimate sacrifice without hesitation, I am proud beyond words of the actions taken by the former president's detail, the counter-sniper team who neutralized the gunman, and the tactical team who was prepared to act. I will be transparent as possible when I speak with you, understanding, though, at times that I may be limited in providing a thorough response in this open setting due to associated risks with sharing highly sensitive protective methodologies. I do not want to inadvertently provide you today with inaccurate information. Since January 1st, 2024, the Secret Service has successfully secured over 7,500 sites. Every protective advance comes with its own set of challenges and requires a customized mitigation strategy, including specific assets. Security plans are multi-layered, providing 360 degrees of protection. These layers include personnel, technical, and tactical assets, which are a force multiplier for our protective posture. During every advance, we attempt to strike a balance between enabling the protectee to be visible and our protective requirements to be secure. I know this because I have spent 29 years in this agency. I came up through the ranks. I've secured events for every president since President Clinton, supervised on Vice President Cheney's detail, led our training center, oversaw all of the investigations and protective visits in the state of Georgia, supervised on Vice President Biden's detail, and the agency's entire protective mission during the Trump administration. The comprehensive advance process involves collaborative planning between our Secret Service, the protectee's staff, local law enforcement partners, and the level of security provided for the former president increased well before the campaign and has been steadily increasing as threats evolve. The security plan included a full assessment of the Butler Farm showgrounds to identify security vulnerabilities and craft a security plan for the protectee, attendees, and the public. Immediately following the assassination attempt, I directed the activation of my crisis center. I assembled my executive team to begin surging more protective resources to the former president and to ensure the wellness of our people post-incident, all while securing an active crime scene. I immediately ordered a reevaluation of the Republican National Convention security plan, and I increased the security posture in the National Capital Region for all permanent protectees and sites. At the same time, I initiated a mission assurance investigation within our agency. I have instructed my team that all necessary resources will be dedicated to investigating these matters. We will not rest until we have explored every option, and we will leave no stone unturned. But I want to be clear, I am not waiting for these investigations to be completed prior to making changes. Over the past 2 weeks, we successfully led the planning and execution of the 75th NATO Summit and the Republican National Convention. Over the next few months, we will implement security plans for the Democratic National Convention, the United Nations General Assembly, and have already begun planning and coordinating the 2025 inauguration. It is now more important than ever for the men and women of the Secret Service to remain resilient and to focus on what is necessary to carry out our critical mission. Our agency needs to be adequately resourced in order to serve our current mission requirements and anticipate future requirements. The Secret Service currently protects 36 individuals on a daily basis, as well as world leaders who visit the United States, like Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who arrived in Washington, D.C. today. The coming years will bring an unprecedented heavy protection tempo. I have no doubt that the processes that I have implemented during my tenure as director, in addition to my nearly 30 years of experience in this agency, have positioned the Secret Service to be stronger. Our mission is not political. It is literally a matter of life and death, and the tragic events on July 13th remind us of that. I have full confidence in the men and women of the Secret Service. They are worthy of our support in executing our protective mission. I will now answer any questions that the committee may have.
Thank you very much, Director Cheatle. We'll now begin our 5 minutes questions, and I will begin. Just for the record, the Secret Service has an annual budget of around $3.1 billion, and I believe around 8,000 employees. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Obviously, there were many security failures on the day of the attempted assassination and leading up to that day. Let's start with the building that the shooter used to shoot President Trump from. At any point Saturday, did the Secret Service have an agent on top of that roof?
Sir, I'm sure, as you can imagine, that we are just 9 days out from this incident, and there's still an ongoing investigation. And so I want to make sure that any information that we are providing to you is factual.
You can't, okay. Why did the Secret Service not, can you answer why the Secret Service didn't place a single agent on the roof?
We are still looking into the advance process and the decisions that were made.
Okay. Wasn't that building within the perimeter that should be secured? Do we agree with that?
The building was outside of the perimeter on the day of the visit. But again, that is one of the things that during the investigation we want to take a look at and determine whether or not other decisions should have been made.
One of the things that you said, I believe in an interview, that there wasn't an agent on the roof because it was a sloped roof. Is that normal, and do you fear that that immediately creates an opportunity for future would-be assassins to look for a slanted roof? I mean, this is a huge question that every American has. Why wasn't a Secret Service agent on the roof? And there have been reports that agents were supposed to be on the roof, but it was hot that day and they didn't want to be on the roof. Can you answer any of those questions, Director?
So I appreciate you asking me that question, Chairman. I should have been more clear in my answer when I spoke about where we placed personnel in that interview. What I can tell you is that there was a plan in place to provide overwatch, and we are still looking into responsibilities and who was going to provide overwatch. But the Secret Service in general, not speaking specifically to this incident, when we are providing overwatch, whether that be through counter snipers or other technology, prefer to have sterile rooftops.
Did the Secret Service use any drones for surveillance that day?
So again, I'm not going to get into specifics of that day in itself, but there are times during a security plan that the Secret Service does deploy an asset like a drone.
There were reports that the shooter used a drone just a few hours before the rally start time. Is that accurate?
I have heard those same reports, and again, am waiting for the final report.
Do you know, if you can't answer the question, that's your answer. But can you answer this? Do you know, I'm not asking yes or no, but do you know if the shooter used a drone before the shooting?
That information has been passed to us from the FBI.
How many Secret Service agents were assigned to President Trump on the day of the rally?
Again, I'm not going to get into the specifics of the numbers of personnel that we had there, but we feel that there was a sufficient number of agents assigned.
There are reports that several agents assigned to the rally on July 13th were temporary agents, agents not normally assigned to President Trump. Is that accurate?
What I can tell you is that the agents that were assigned to former President Trump are Secret Service agents that provide close protection to him, and that was what was actual on that day.
How many temporary agents were there that day?
Quite frequently, sir, during campaign events, the Secret Service utilizes agents from HSI or the Department of Homeland Security.
You don't know how many?
Supplement
you can't answer?
our plan.
Have the investigators reconstructed the shooter's precise movements over the past days, weeks, and months?
So, again,
we need to have confidence that if the FBI is leading this investigation, that they're leading a credible investigation, because there's some of us sitting up here today that don't have a lot of confidence in the FBI. So I will repeat the question. Have the investigators reconstructed the shooter's precise moments over the past days, weeks, and months?
I understand your question, Chairman, and I share your concerns about wanting to make sure that we have factual information. The FBI is conducting a criminal investigation. The Secret Service is conducting an internal investigation. There are a number of OIG investigations, and there is the external investigation that the President
Last question for me. Before July 13th, had the Trump detail requested additional resources?
What I can tell you is that for the event on July 13th, the details that were the assets that were requested for that day were given.
Okay. My time has expired. Chair now recognizes Ranking Member Raskin for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's been reported that before former President Trump got up on the stage at around 6 p.m. on Saturday, July 13th, that the local police had identified and even photographed a man who was acting suspiciously. And this man, who turned out to be the gunman, had been flagged as a potential threat. Is that accurate?
What I can say is that the individual was identified as suspicious.
So he was known to be suspicious before former President Trump took the stage.
That is the information I have received.
Why was he allowed to take the stage with a suspicious person having been identified in the crowd?
So I appreciate the question, and I'd like to make 2 points. If the detail had been passed information that there was a threat, the detail would never have brought the former president out onto stage. That is what we do, and that is who we are. We are charged with protecting all of our protectees.
So you distinguish between someone who is suspicious and someone who's threatening, is that right?
I do. There are a number of times at protective events where suspicious people are identified, and those individuals have to be investigated and determined what is it that identifies that person as suspicious.
So did you deny a request for additional resources that had been made by the Trump campaign?
There were no assets denied for that event in Butler on the 13th.
I see. So you're saying there were requests made for additional assistance for other specific events rather than for the campaign as a whole. Is that right?
I'm sorry, I'm not understanding.
Well, you seem to say that there were not additional resources requested for that event. And forgive me for being unfamiliar with this. Is it requested event by event, or is it requested just in general for the campaign?
So if I can explain the advance process, when an event or a venue is identified by, in this case, campaign staff, then the campaign staff works together with Secret Service agents who go out and conduct an advance. Generally, that is a 5-day time period where those discussions are had about what the perimeter is going to look like, what the size of the event is, what the venue is, and then from there, there is a request made to mitigate potential risk and threat. And I'm saying that on that day, the requests that were pushed forward were granted.
So the Secret Service did not know that the gunman actually had a weapon before President Trump was allowed to get up on the stage?
To the best of our knowledge and the facts that we have at this point, that is correct.
So can you answer this question, which I think is on the mind of most Americans thinking about this? How can a 20-year-old with his father's AR-15 assault weapon climb onto a roof with a direct 150-yard line of sight to the speaker's podium without the Secret Service or local police stopping him?
So again, sir, I will say we are 9 days out from this event, and I would like to know those answers as well, which is why we are going through these investigations to be able to determine that fully. Okay.
It's been reported that the shooter was not carrying a driver's license or any form of identification. They had no idea who he was, but then he was quickly identified, I think within 30 minutes, by using the serial number on the AR-15 under a tracing system that is now controversial. Some people say we should get rid of it. Some people want to keep it. But is that right, that the serial number was the key information which led to the identification of the shooter?
That is my understanding, sir, yes.
Okay. If an American citizen were just to stop you and say, Director Cheatle, we support your work to the tune of billions of dollars and thousands of employees, what went wrong? What would you say?
Again, knowing that we're 9 days out, I would say, as I have said from the very outset, I accept responsibility for this tragedy. We are going to look into how this happened, and we are going to take corrective action to ensure that it never happens again.
Well, I appreciate that, and I hope you will act with vigor and focus and intensity, and it seems you understand the gravity and solemnity of this to the American people. Millions and millions of Americans don't feel safe with all the AR-15s out there. We thought at least the President of the United States or a former President of the United States would be safe, but now that's not even clear. Mr. Chairman, I yield back to you.
Gentleman yields back. Chair now recognizes Chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, Mr. Jordan from Ohio.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director, were you guessing or lying? The day after President Trump is shot, Secret Service spokesman Anthony Guglielmi said, quote, the assertion that a member of the former president's security team requested additional security resources that the U.S. Secret Service or the Department of Homeland Security rebuffed is absolutely false. The next day, Secretary Mayorkas said that is an unequivocally false assertion. We had not received any request for additional security measures that were rebuffed. But 5 days later, the Washington Post said this, top officials repeatedly rejected requests from Donald Trump's security detail for more personnel. The next day, the New York Times said this, Mr. Guglielmi acknowledged that the Secret Service had turned down some requests for additional federal security assets for Mr. Trump's detail. So which is it? Because both statements can't be true. Were you guessing or lying when you said you didn't turn down requests from President Trump's detail?
Neither, sir, and I appreciate the question.
Well, what were you doing? Because those statements don't jive.
So what I can tell you is that for the event in Butler, there were no requests that were denied. As far as requests...
Well, maybe they got tired of asking. Maybe you turned them down so darn much, they said, Not worth asking. How many times did you turn him down ahead of that?
I think that it is important to distinguish between what some people may view as a denial of an asset or a request.
Well, is Mr. Guglielmi your spokesperson? He said he acknowledged the Secret Service had turned down some requests. I'm asking how many?
A denial of a request does not equal a vulnerability.
Well, tell me what it is.
There are a number of ways that threats and risks can be mitigated with a number of different assets, whether that be through personnel, whether that be through technology, or other resources.
Well, tell the committee which it was. They asked for additional help in some form or another. You told them no. How many times did you tell them no, and what did you tell them no to?
Again, I cannot speak to specific incidents, but I can tell you in general terms, the Secret Service is judicious with their resources based on...
What does some requests mean? How many times? Some indicate requests is plural. So more than once they asked for additional help and you turned them down. What did they ask for and how many times did you turn them down? Pretty basic questions.
So again, without having all of the details in front of me, sir, what I can tell you is that there are times...
You didn't get briefed on how many times you turned down the Trump detail when they asked for additional help?
I'm sorry.
You didn't get briefed on that before you came to this hearing knowing you were going to get asked that question?
What I can tell you is that in generic terms, when details make a request, there are times that there are alternate ways to cover off on that threat or that risk.
But that's not what he said. He said they were denied certain requests, some requests. This is your spokesperson, not me talking. This is the Secret Service talking. And what a change from absolutely false, unequivocally false to, oh, by the way, there were some times where we didn't give them what they wanted. That's a huge change in 5 days. And the fact that you can't answer how many times you did that, that's pretty darn frustrating, not just for me, but for the country.
I hear your frustration.
Let me ask you this. Were any of those requests denied to President Trump's detail after you knew about the Iranian threat?
What I can tell you, again, I don't know the specifics, is that there are times when we can fill a request. It doesn't necessarily have to be with a Secret Service asset or resource. We can fill that request with locally available assets.
You spoke to anyone at the White House since July 13th?
Yes, I have.
Who'd you talk to?
I have briefed the President and the Vice President.
Talked to the First Lady?
No, I have not.
Talked to the White House staff? Anyone in the White House communications?
No, I have not.
Have you talked to the counter sniper who took the shot that took out the bad guy?
Yes, I have.
And can you tell us about that conversation?
I would not want to reveal conversations that I've had with my employees.
But that's exactly the kind of information the American people want to know. American people who pay your salary.
I understand. This is an ongoing investigation, and
Who's all doing the investigating at Secret Service? I know the Inspector General, but is there also an internal investigation in addition to the Inspector General?
We are conducting a mission assurance investigation internally, yes.
You know what it looks like, Director? It looks like you won't answer some pretty basic questions. It looks like you got a 9% raise and you cut corners when it came to protecting one of the most important individuals, most well-known individuals on the planet. A former president, likely the guy who's going to be the next president. Looks like you guys were cutting corners. That's what it looks like to me. Is that true?
I am here today because I want to answer questions, but I also want to be cautious.
You might want to, but you haven't answered, I don't think you've answered one question from the chairman, the ranking member, or me. Well, we got a lot of other people asking. We'll see if your record improves, but right now you haven't answered, I don't think, any questions. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair now recognizes Ms. Norton from Washington, D.C.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In the summer of 1963, as a law student, I traveled to the South to work in the civil rights movement. When I arrived in Jackson, Mississippi, I was met by a civil rights activist who showed me around town and tried to convince me to work in Jackson that summer. I recall talking with him and his wife about the raw atmosphere in Jackson. Later that day, he took me to the bus station for my trip to my assignment. That night, he was assassinated outside his home. His name was Medgar Evers. I condemn the political violence. It is a threat to democracy. I want to discuss one of the roots of political violence, guns. For years, Republicans, including a member of this committee, have introduced legislation and amendments to repeal or block the District of Columbia gun violence protection laws, including its bans on assault weapons and large capacity magazines. The shooter at the Trump rally used the mass shooter's gun of choice, an assault weapon, specifically an AR-15 style rifle, and presumably a large capacity magazine, which is defined in D.C. as a magazine that can hold more than 10 bullets. Under current D.C. law, D.C. does not recognize concealed carry permits issued by other jurisdictions, but it does issue concealed carry permits to both residents and non-residents. However, D.C. imposes a number of requirements on concealed carry applicants, including suitability, such as not having exhibited a propensity for violence or instability. Moreover, D.C. residents restricts where the guns can be carried, such as a political demonstration near the White House and Naval Observatory, or near people under Secret Service protection, provided the permit holder has been given notice. This week, the House is expected to consider the fiscal year 2025 Financial Services and General Government Appropriations Bill. This Republican drafted bill would allow an individual with a permit to carry a concealed handgun issued by a state or territory to carry a concealed handgun in D.C., regardless of that jurisdiction's permit requirements. A Republican has filed an amendment to that provision to allow such an individual to carry a magazine of any size with that handgun. In short, the pending bill and amendment would allow any person with a carry permit issued by another jurisdiction to carry a concealed handgun with a magazine of any size in any location in the District of Columbia. The Secret Service is responsible for protecting a large number of people and facilities in D.C. Director Cheatle, would Secret Service protectees in D.C. be safer or less safe if people who have exhibited a propensity for violence or instability could carry a concealed handguns in D.C.?
I think being a Secret Service agent and an officer or a law enforcement officer in any state is difficult. They are required to make decisions and snap judgments in the blink of an eye. And I think that the officers and the agents that work here in the D.C. area do a great job of monitoring the public and reacting to threats as appropriate when they arise.
Would Secret Service protectees in D.C. be safer or less safe if people in D.C. could carry concealed handguns with large capacity magazines?
I think, ma'am, that we work in parameters where we travel around North America, and the rules on open carry and concealed carry are different from state to state, and that is part of what the Secret Service takes into account when we develop a security plan. Obviously, anyone that comes into one of our protective sites, we would establish magnetometer support, metal detectors that personnel would have to process through, eliminating that potential.
Would Secret Service protectees in D.C. be safer or less safe if more people could carry handguns in D.C.?
I think, again, as I stated, ma'am, we want to make sure that we provide a safe environment for all of our protectees, and whatever measures we would need to put in place for a secure site, we would do so.
I yield back.
Gentlelady's time's expired. Chair now recognizes the Chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, Mr. Turner from Ohio.
Director Cheatle, your opening statement indicates that the Secret Service constructed a security plan for the site in Pennsylvania. I'm assuming that security plan would also include the security footprint for the site, but it also would be based upon a threat assessment for the risk threats associated with Donald Trump and the crowd in attendance. Would it not include a threat assessment?
Yes, it would.
So that threat assessment, as we know, basically would have started with, there's a generalized threat against Donald Trump because he is a presidential candidate. Then it would have gone to he's a former president, and he gets security coverage just as Bush, Clinton, Carter, and Obama do. And then you also have the heightened political environment. Even for those, it's clear that the security footprint, that the threat assessment was insufficient, which permitted then a 20-year-old to actually enter with a weapon and shoot Donald Trump. But I want to ask you about two other aspects of the threat assessment. It is known and public that Iran is a threat risk for Donald Trump. They're a threat risk for John Bolton, former Secretary of State Pompeo, and Donald Trump, because they have indicated they want to assassinate them as a result of retaliation for the killing of Soleimani. That is both, for Iran, a generalized threat. They're targeting these individuals, but also, most recently, a specific threat to Donald Trump himself. Now, I want to enter into the record by UC a Department of Justice Public Affairs release, a CNN article, an article from Fox News, and an article from CBS, all of which acknowledge
Without objection to order.
that this threat exists for Donald Trump from Iran, and that there are specific threats, most recently, that have been acknowledged. Director Cheatle, have you read the intelligence of the generalized threat to Donald Trump by Iran as a result of their desire to retaliate for the killing of Soleimani?
I have.
Have you read or been briefed about the intelligence of the specific recent threat to Donald Trump from Iran?
Yes, I have.
Director Wray, when we were getting our briefing, indicated that he thought the threat assessment should have included this threat from Iran. Is it your testimony today that the threat assessment, since you've read this intelligence, was sufficient to protect him from this threat from Iran?
My testimony today is that the information that we had at the time was known.
Was it sufficient? Director Cheatle, was it sufficient for the Iranian threat that you said you have read the intelligence briefings for?
That information was passed to.
Well, I'm not asking the bureaucratic issue of who did it get passed around to. Director Cheatle, was it sufficient for the specific and generalized threat to Donald Trump's life from Iran?
Yes, I do believe it was.
Director Cheatle, is an Iranian assassin more capable than a 20-year-old?
Sir, I think we've acknowledged that there was gaps and a failure that day.
When I raised this issue with Director Wray, he was incensed. He was shocked that the threat assessment of Iran did not seem to be, as we and I discussed, baked in to your security footprint and your threat assessment. And he went on to say that the generalized threat that he has told the whole country that we are under from a potential terrorist threat. He has said we're under the highest threat level since 9/11, that the lights are flashing red. And he has specifically indicated that people have crossed the southern border as a result of the Biden administration's policy, and that there are in our country today terrorists and individuals who are affiliated with terrorist groups and organizations. That would be a heightened threat environment, Director Cheatle, would it not?
Yes.
In his public statements, he has said he is making these statements because he wants people to take them into consideration in threat assessments, specifically. Now, that would be a threat not just to Donald Trump, but it would also be a threat to the crowd there, wouldn't it?
Yes.
Are ISIS terrorists and al-Qaeda terrorists and international groups and terrorists more capable than a 20-year-old in pulling off either a mass shooting or an assassination of Donald Trump?
Sir, again, there was clearly a breakdown and a failure that day.
Have you read the intelligence of the terrorists that are currently in the United States that Director Wray speaks, and those individuals that are here that are affiliated with terrorist groups and organizations that are in the process, as Director Wray said, of representing a significant threat of a terrorist attack occurring in the United States?
I have read reports that apply specifically to the Secret Service's mission.
Director Cheatle, because Donald Trump is alive, and thank God he is, you look incompetent. If Donald Trump had been killed, you would have looked culpable. There is no aspect of this that indicates that there has been any protection to Donald Trump. The threat was identified before he took the stage, and the shooter was only killed after Donald Trump himself was killed. Not only should you resign if you refuse to do so, President Biden needs to fire you because his life, Donald Trump's life, and all the other people which you protect are at risk because you have no concept of the aspect that the security footprint needs to be correlated to the threat. I yield back.
Chair now recognizes Mr. Lynch from Massachusetts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Cheatle, there were multiple security failures at the former president's rally in Butler, Pennsylvania. First of all, there was a failure to isolate the podium from exposure to direct fire. Do we know who made that decision to allow that rooftop to remain as an unprotected area? Do we know who came up with that security plan that omitted that?
Sir, I don't have a specific person to identify for you.
Okay, well, that's what I'm looking for, so let's move on. There's also a breakdown in security and failure to confront the shooter over an hour before the former president began his remarks when the shooter was identified as a person of interest. What particularly allowed agents or law enforcement to identify him as a person of interest?
So I appreciate the question, and again, I will say that we are 9 days out, and there are a multitude of interviews that are still taking place.
Okay, so did he have a rangefinder? There were some reports that the individual had a rangefinder. That would certainly raise my suspicion. Did he have a rangefinder?
Yes, he did, but may I explain that at a number of our sites, especially when you're at outdoor venues, a rangefinder is not a prohibited item. It is sometimes an item that is brought in by individuals if you're going to be in the back.
Did anybody confront him on that? Anybody ask him questions? What are you doing with the rangefinder? Anybody confront him on his presence where he was in proximity to the president?
So again, to my knowledge, I believe that that was the process that was taking place, was to locate the individual.
Did they confront him? Did they go up to him? Did they talk to him?
I do not have those details at this time.
Those are important details. There was also a failure to communicate between law enforcement to act quickly upon information provided by either local law enforcement or rally attendees that the suspect was positioned on the roof. There were minutes of delay before any meaningful action was taken, even though he was several hundred feet from the podium, and this was obviously minutes before the shooting. Let me ask you, there was considerable delay in removing the president from the podium after the shooting began. He got shot in the air. It was still over a minute before he was removed from the stage. Meanwhile, this shooter had multiple clips, several clips. He got off 8 shots, and he had the capacity and the ability, if he was not neutralized, to basically mow down that whole Secret Service detachment as well as the president. What, from your own investigation, caused that delay under the circumstances?
What I can tell you is that when the agents identified that the shooting was taking place, in under 3 seconds, they threw themselves on top of the president.
I understand that there was heroism there, no question about it, no question about it. But protocol would indicate, and these are the opinions of various former Secret Service agents, people who have done this work in the past, that over a minute of exposure on that podium with a shooter with a high-capacity weapon who had already wounded the president and could have got off, we don't know how many more rounds, and yet the president remained exposed, even though he was joined in that exposure by the Secret Service in their heroic acts. It just, I don't know if there's a good explanation for that.
Our personnel created a body bunker on top of the president,
I get that.
shielding him.
Yeah, this was an AR-15 style weapon that would have made pretty quick work if he was determined and able to do so. This is not the first investigation that we've had of the Secret Service during my time here on this committee, and the last one we had, our previous investigation determined that the Secret Service was experiencing a staffing crisis that poses perhaps the greatest threat to the agency, and that's a quote. Is that staffing crisis still in place? Is that still something that you deal with on a daily basis?
As of today, the Secret Service has just over 8,000 employees. We continue to hire, knowing that we need to ensure that we keep pace with
What would be the full complement of
And gentlemen, time's expired, but please answer the question.
yeah.
I'm sorry.
What would be the full complement that you're looking for? You've got 8,000, and how many would be a full complement for the service?
So we are still striving towards a number of 9,500 employees approximately in order to be able to meet future and emerging needs.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your courtesy. I yield back.
Chair recognizes Dr. Fox from North Carolina.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Cheatle, what grade would you give the Secret Service's performance in Butler, Pennsylvania on July 13?
As I've stated, ma'am, this was clearly a failure. I would grade the agents and officers who selflessly threw themselves in front of the president and neutralized the threat an A. I think that we need to examine the events that led up to and prior to that day.
You stated in 2021 that the Secret Service has a zero-fail mission. It's clear that the events of July 13 show a cascade of failures that cost Corey Comparator his life, nearly cost former president his life, and injured David Dutch and James Copenhaver. When an agency fails spectacularly at its mission, those responsible must be held accountable, and the problems must be fixed so they cannot happen again. Why should the American people or the officials you're responsible for protecting have confidence in your ability to lead the Secret Service after such a spectacular failure?
I appreciate the question, and I am committed to finding answers so that we can make the agency stronger after this.
You said on July 15 that the buck stops with me. How are you taking accountability for the Secret Service's failures during the July 13 assassination attempt on President Trump?
I have taken accountability, and I will continue to take accountability. I am responsible for leading the agency, and I am responsible for finding the answers to how this event occurred and making sure that it doesn't happen again.
So I would like to explore how you got the job as director of the United States Secret Service. Is it typical for the director of the Secret Service to be recommended for the role at the behest of a president's family and senior staff, perhaps at the request of Jill Biden or Anthony Bernal?
I got the job as a director of the Secret Service because I spent 27 years in an agency with a mission that I absolutely love. I started my career in Detroit. I worked my way up through investigations and protection.
Was there competition for the position?
You would have to ask those who were involved in the interview process.
But you think you are the best person in the country to head the Secret Service?
I think that I am the best person to lead the Secret Service at this time.
The Secret Service receives billions in funding each year, as has been explained by my colleagues here. In fact, you've had an increase in real terms of 55%. As you're no doubt aware, staffing levels for those assigned to protect the president, former presidents, and other senior officials has decreased by about 350 between 2014 and today. Clearly, a lack of financial resources not to blame for the staffing shortage. In 2022, the Secret Service saw nearly half its workforce leave in 1 year, and during the same year, it was ranked dead last among law enforcement agencies in the best places to work in the federal government. Can you explain why your agency was so poorly rated and why so many staff left in just 1 year?
So with all due respect, I dispute the statistic of half of the employees leaving in 2022. I think that that has been inaccurate data that's been reported out there. But what I can tell you is, as I have returned as the director of the agency, We have had an increase in hiring and staffing and an increase in resources, and we are committed to continue to hire so that we can be staffed appropriately to meet the dynamic mission that we have.
Well, you may want to dispute it, but it's out there. My understanding, given the high-profile failures and rotten culture at the Secret Service during your nearly two-year tenure, why should the American people have any confidence in your ability to lead the Secret Service to perform its zero-fail mission to protect our senior leaders?
The Secret Service has an incredible culture. Our men and women place service over self. They come in every day willing to risk their lives for our protective mission, and they work investigations that thwart people who would do harm to children, child exploiters. We have an incredible mission, and our culture is we will get the job done no matter what.
Well, those on the front line certainly have a great culture, and they were willing to risk their lives for President Trump. But I'm not sure the leadership at the agency has this right kind of culture. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Chair now recognizes Mr. Conley from Virginia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, I hope the American people do appreciate the incredible daily risks Secret Service agents take on our behalf. You mentioned there are 36 regular clients you've got that you protect constantly, but I was participating in the NATO summit just 2 weeks ago. We had 32 heads of government and heads of state, plus visiting heads of state and heads of government. Presumably, you provided protection for all of them.
That is correct.
Just saying. Help us understand, however, I will stipulate that there's an ongoing investigation. You don't want to go into too much detail on that until you've been able to ascertain all the facts and analyze what they mean. You can understand, however, the anxiety we and the American public have about how could this happen and how can we ensure it can't recur. Now, there are some things my friends on one particular side of the aisle don't really want to talk about, like AR-15s and access to them by a 20-year-old, or anybody for that matter. Presumably, Director Cheatle, the ubiquity of weapons, guns in America, especially assault weapons or semi-automatic weapons, that's helped your job and the mission of your agencies, right? It's made it less complicated, isn't that true?
I'm sorry, I'm not understanding your question.
Real simple. More guns, especially dangerous ones, have made your job protecting people easier. Is that not right?
I think from every
Director
state,
Cheatle, this is simple English. More guns, do they make your job more complicated or less complicated in protecting these 36 clients and visiting heads of state and heads of government that come to Washington?
I think the Secret Service needs to take into account.
I didn't ask that.
They're in.
I'm sorry. I asked a simple question, which deserves a simple answer. The ubiquity of guns, dangerous weapons in America, like AR-15s, has that made your job, that is to say the mission of the Secret Service, easier or more difficult?
I think the threat environment for protecting our Secret Service protectees is always difficult, and that's dynamic, and it's always evolving.
We stipulate it's always difficult. Again, this is a simple one. Does the ubiquity of guns make your job easier or more difficult today?
I understand the Second Amendment rights of individuals.
I didn't ask that question. I'm not questioning the Second Amendment. I'm asking a simple analysis, Director Cheatle. And I can tell you, you're not making my job easier in terms of assessing your qualification for continuing on as director. Please answer the question. You're the head of the Secret Service. You're speaking on behalf of 8,000 members who put their lives on the line. We just had a failure by your own admission. Do guns make your job easier or harder?
I think the job of the Secret Service is difficult on every day, and we need to make sure that we are mitigating all threats, whether that be
That
weapons,
isn't my question.
personnel.
That is not my question. And now I think you're evading the answer, which is not a hard one.
I am sorry that you feel that way, sir.
How else could I feel, Director Cheatle, when you're clearly avoiding a direct answer to a very simple declarative question? We
trying-
almost lost a presidential candidate the other day. A 20-year-old had access to his father's AR-15 and got on top of a roof within 500 yards or feet of the podium. And I'm asking you, did the availability of that AR-15, which is replicated all across America, make your job harder or easier? And you're not willing to answer that question? And you think, and you wonder why we might have a lack of confidence in your continued ability to direct this agency?
I understand your question, and that's the environment.
Well, if you understand my question, why not answer it?
Because it's the environment that the Secret Service works in every day.
That doesn't tell me anything. That's the environment we work in. I had an attack on my office a year ago. I know a little bit about violence too. He came to kill me. When he couldn't, he beat one of my staffers 8 times with a baseball bat on the head. We live with the threat of violence. But a simple answer from the director of the Secret Service would be helpful. And I'm sorry you've chosen to evade it. I yield back.
Chair, now recognize Mr. Grofman from Wisconsin.
Thank you. When this guy took the shots, he climbed a ladder to get on the roof, correct?
I'm unable to answer details of exactly how the individual accessed the roof at this time.
Do you know when if he did use the ladder, do you know when the ladder was placed there? Was the ladder there 2 days before, just the night before? Do you have any information at all as to when the ladder got there?
I would like to be able to answer those questions. The FBI is still conducting an investigation.
How did the rifle get to the roof?
Again, sir, at this time, I'm unable to answer questions to provide clarity.
Have they cleaned the roof since the assassination attempt?
Have they cleaned the roof?
Right. Has anything been done to the roof? Is it just like it was, whatever, 10 days ago, or not? Has anything been done to the roof?
I don't have an answer for that.
Okay. Were President Trump's normal agents normally assigned to him there that day?
Yes.
There was these were the same agents that were always there?
Yes,
Right.
sir. The people that are assigned to his detail were working on that day.
Okay, there's stuff on the internet that says they were not there that day, but these are the same agents who are routinely there?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Do we know which agents fired the shots that finally took down the potential assassin?
Yes, sir, I do.
Can you give us those names or the background of those agents?
I would not offer their name up in this setting, but it was one of our technical officers, our counter snipers.
Okay, so can we privately get those names, the committee?
I am certain that we can make names available privately.
Okay. Do we know where all the shots landed? First of all, how many shots did that potential assassin, how many shots came out of the rifle?
So again, I would hesitate to offer that information as the FBI is conducting an investigation.
Have we got the bullets from all the shots?
Again, that would be the responsibility of the FBI to collect that evidence.
Okay. Do we have the correspondence from the shooter? Has that been recovered from his phone, whatever?
Again, I would have to defer you to the FBI for details on that investigation.
Okay. You've spent some time trying to change the makeup of the Secret Service. Okay, you feel there are, whatever, too high a percentage are men. Does this affect at all who you are hiring for the Secret Service?
I've spent my time as the director trying to increase the number of people that we hire in the Secret Service so that we have the best and the brightest, and that's been my concentration as the director.
Okay, you ever not hiring men because of your desire to hit certain targets?
I am hiring the best qualified candidates that put in an application that want to work for our great organization.
Okay. Next question. The shooter obtained a direct sight of President Trump from the position on the rooftop. I assume that is not something that should ever happen. It should never happen. Do you want to elaborate a little on how that happened, or what you wish you had done differently, or would do differently next time there's a Trump rally?
Again, sir, the facts of this particular event are still unfolding. 9 days, there have been a number of reports that have been out there, so I do not want to provide information that perhaps would contradict something that has been erroneously reported or is not factual. But there clearly was a mistake, and we will take every effort to make sure that this never happens again.
Could you elaborate why you want 1/3 of the Secret Service to be women?
I've never stated that I want 1/3 of the Secret Service to be women.
30% or something? You had some target, no? Okay.
Would gentleman yield?
I'll yield.
What was, Director, what was erroneously reported? You said, to Mr. Grothman's question, you said something was erroneously reported. What are you referring to?
I'm referring to their...
His question was in the context of the shooter using a ladder to get on the building. What was erroneously reported? Because you won't tell us anything, but you'll tell us something that wasn't reported accurately?
I'm saying, sir, that there have been a number of reports that are out there that have been speculation, and until we have the actual facts, I don't want to report anything that would contradict speculation that has been out there.
Thank you, gentlemen, for yielding.
Chair recognizes Mr. Krishnamurti from Illinois.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Ranking Member, for bringing us together this morning. One question I get asked a lot from my constituents is, what can Congress actually do to stop this from happening again? And I'd like to share a graphic from a very recent study conducted by Professor Robert Pape, a world-renowned expert in combating political violence. The graphic shows that 74% of Americans want this Congress to come together to denounce political violence of all stripes, and you can tell it's across party lines. I commend the chair and ranking member for putting out the statement the other day condemning political violence, and to further this effort, I'd like to ask all my colleagues to join Dr. Brad Wenstrup and me in introducing a resolution that we think can secure unanimous House passage in deploring and condemning political violence, and we will be circulating that resolution shortly. Director Cheatle, as you know, the shooter began shooting at 6:11 p.m. Eastern on July 13th. NBC reported that at 5:51 p.m., 20 minutes before the shooting began, the state police informed the Secret Service of their concern. Now, the rally was not paused at that point, correct?
No.
And according to NBC, just 2 minutes later, at 5:53 p.m., the Secret Service notified its snipers about the gunman. The rally wasn't paused at that point either, correct?
No.
Let me show you some video footage by rally goers. If you could play the video on the screen up here. This was taken 2 minutes before the shooting started. If you could turn up the volume.
Criminals. We have criminals. We have drug dealers. We have people that should not be here.
Right on the roof.
It's much tougher than
it happens. You went right on the roof, big guy.
Up here.
Ma'am, that doesn't look like suspicious behavior. That looks like threatening behavior to me. And the rally wasn't paused at that point either, correct?
I can tell you, as I stated earlier, sir, that the moment that the shift surrounding the president were aware of an actual threat.
That's a threat right there. The guy's on the roof and everybody's yelling at him.
Yes.
And directing the officer's attention to him. The rally was not paused at that point, correct?
We are currently still combing through communications and when communications were passed.
Well, I can point you to this communication. It's 2 minutes before the shots started ringing out. Director Cheatle, yes or no? Was there ever a moment where the Secret Service actually considered pausing the rally?
The Secret Service would have paused the rally had they known or been
So the
told
answer is
there
no.
was an actual threat.
The answer is no. Correct?
I can speak to you in generalities.
No, I don't want
I don't
generalities. I
know
want
all of the
specifics.
communications
The
that were-
answer is no. You did not consider pausing the rally, correct?
The people that are in charge of protecting the president on that day would never bring the former president out if there was a threat that had been identified.
Well, they did, because we've now identified 3 points in the 20 minutes before the shooting that the threat emerged. Let me point you to something else, which is the building that the shooter was perched on, seen here. This building is called the AGR building. I'm sure that you're familiar with it. It's no more than 150 yards from the stage where Donald Trump stood, yet the security perimeter was drawn such that the AGR building was placed outside of it. Director Cheatle, according to the Washington Post, the AR-15 styled rifle used in the shooting had a range of 400 to 600 yards, and therefore the AGR building was clearly within rifle range of the stage, correct?
Yes.
NBC News has reported that in the days before the rally, the Secret Service had identified the building as a vulnerability that required special attention, correct?
That's reporting from NBC.
Yes.
So I am still looking into an active investigation.
I know, but it's been 9 days. I mean, you should know that, right? And yet, despite the fact that the AGR building was in rifle range of the stage and it was flagged as a vulnerability, this building was put outside of the Secret Service's security perimeter. And I respectfully submit the Secret Service must expand its security perimeter to account for the kinds of weapons that can be used outside the perimeter to endanger the protectees inside the perimeter, ma'am. Let me turn your attention to some conspiracy theories that have been circulating and ask you to comment on them. First, you have not found evidence that the incident was a staged shooting, right?
Correct.
And you haven't found evidence that this was a result of a conspiracy of high-ranking government officials, correct?
Correct.
And you have not found evidence that this incident was in fact directed or perpetrated by a foreign state or entity, right?
And that's the last question, but I'll let the director answer that, please.
Not at this time.
Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman's time's expired. Chair now recognizes Mr. Cloud from Texas.
Thank you. I just wanted to confirm there was only one counter sniper who took one shot? Is that
We had multiple counter sniper teams available
yeah, on the
that day.
premises, but is only one took one shot? Is that correct, or only one?
Correct.
Okay. How many spent shell casings were found on the roof?
Again, I would have to defer you to the FBI's criminal investigation.
Okay. Word is that the car was rigged with explosives.
Again, sir, I'd have to defer you
To
to
the
the
FBI.
FBI's investigation.
Okay. You're not curious about? You don't communicate with them? No. Okay. CNN reported that the Secret Service did not sweep the building the shooter was used to shoot President Trump and other attendees. Is that true or false?
So we are conducting a mission insurance investigation and will depend on the information that we obtain from our investigations.
Okay. The Secret Service knew there was a suspicious person anywhere from 8 minutes before President walked on stage to 30 to 60 minutes. We have different reports. Was President Trump or his team notified of the threat?
I think there's a difference and a distinction between suspicious
person.
and threat.
Yeah.
So we are going back and looking at communications to know when the information about a suspicious person was passed to Secret Service personnel.
Okay, but was President Trump or his team notified?
Again, we are going back and looking to make sure that we have the exact information of when those notifications were made and who those notifications were made to.
Okay. I think it's troubling for a lot of us that the number one question everyone in America is wondering is why was the roof left open? And after 9 days, we should at least maybe have a little bit of that information. And when you come to this committee hearing and you don't have anything to say about that, it's very, very troubling. Did you review the security plan for this event?
I personally do not review security plans for events that take place across the country.
Any of them?
We have a number of events that
Who's
take
the
place.
top-level official who reviews the security plans?
There's a number of people that review security plans.
Who's
as they
ultimately
unfold.
responsible for signing off on a security plan?
It's a conjunction of personnel. There are people on the ground, there are supervisors on the detail, there are people at headquarters.
So there's not one person who says, okay, this is good, it's copacetic, we're going for it?
I think much in the way that we build our security plans, where they are
No
multi-layered.
doubt there's teams working different aspects of it, but ultimately, isn't there an individual who signs off on the plan?
Much like how we design our security plans, they're multi-layered, there are multiple layers.
So there's
of
no
people.
accountability?
There is accountability, sir.
There's, this is whether it's the FBI or Fauci or anything, it's time after time after time, these multiple layers of accountability turn into layers of plausible deniability in agency after agency after agency. That's got to be fixed, because you keep coming here and expecting, yes, you're saying I'm responsible, but, and you're accountable for it, but then there's nothing. What do you mean by that? I mean, you're saying you're going to keep your job, right?
I assure you, sir, that if we determine through the course of our investigation that someone or people need to be held accountable, we will do so.
What level of, if President Biden, God forbid, had been shot and killed, would you think that was worthy of resignation?
I would do the same thing that I'm doing here, where I would want to make sure that we are conducting an investigation, that there is continuity in that investigation, and that we could find the answers
You do not
to
think
what
the
happened.
assassination of somebody under your detail is worthy of resignation?
I think that this event was tragic and deserves answers.
The thing that you've said so far is that you want to make sure that this never happens again. The thing is, everyone in America knows that's not the job description that you're tasked with. The job description you're tasked with is to make sure it never happens, period. One of your goals in the strategic plan is to champion diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. You've accomplished the accessibility part. What standards, do you keep the same standards for all applicants and all, or does every Secret Service agent meet the same qualifications, or do you have different standards for different people?
Yes, sir. Everyone who moves through the application process has to meet the same standards to become a special agent.
Okay. The trouble I think we're having with right now, so far you gave a lame excuse for sloped roof. You said that local law enforcement's job was to cover up the building before backtracking on that. We were told that President Trump's team did not ask for security before you backtracked on that. You haven't provided the audio recording that this committee, the chairman, requested that was due Thursday. You didn't give us an advance copy of your opening statement, but yet there was reporting on it somewhere else. There seems to be more information from YouTube videos than you're able to provide for us, and it begs the question to anyone, you're in charge of the investigation of your own failure. So how is anybody in America supposed to be able to trust the results of that investigation as being anything transparent and genuine?
That's the last question, but please feel free to answer the question, Director.
Sir, I've been a Secret Service agent for nearly 30 years. I have led with integrity, and I follow our core values of duty, justice, honor, loyalty, and courage. And I am doing that in this case, and I assure this committee that I will provide answers when we have a full and complete report, in addition to cooperating with all of the other investigations that are ongoing.
Chair now recognizes Mr. Khanna from California.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to thank the chair and the ranking member for convening this hearing on a bipartisan basis. I join them in condemning the horrific assassination attempt on the former president. I am relieved for the sake of the country that he wasn't seriously hurt and that he survived, and my thoughts with him and his family during such a traumatic event. I also want to express condolences to Corey Comprator's family and recognize his heroism in saving his daughter's lives, and to the victims of that awful event. Now, Director Cheatle, would you agree that this is the most serious security lapse since President Reagan was shot in 1981 of the Secret Service?
Yes, sir, I would.
And, you know, do you know what Stuart Knight did when he was in charge at the time of the Secret Service? Do you know what he did afterwards?
He remained on duty.
He resigned. He resigned. And Stuart Knight was not a Democratic appointee or a Republican appointee. Look, I'm not questioning your judgment. I just don't think this is partisan. If you have an assassination attempt on a president, a former president, or a candidate, you need to resign. That's what Stuart Knight did. He was a Republican appointee, and he took responsibility. And I think you need to reflect. This is not a question of you. It's a question of the American people. You cannot go leading a Secret Service agency when there is an assassination attempt on a presidential candidate. I would say that about anyone who is running. And so I guess my question to you is, what's the difference between your position and what Stuart Knight did?
What I will tell you, sir, is that I am dedicated to finding the answers to what happened. And like every Secret Service agent, we don't shirk from our responsibilities. I will remain on and be responsible to the agency, to this committee, to the former president, and to the American public.
But is there a reason you wouldn't just do what Stuart Knight did after the Reagan assassination attempt?
I believe that I provided an answer.
There's nothing more that you have to say? I mean, do you really believe at this moment, given how divided the country is and the questions asked, that your service in this role is the best for the nation? I mean, I'm not saying you can't do public service again, you can't do something else again. Do you really genuinely in your heart believe that you being in this role is what's right for America at this moment? I mean, do you think there are people who are Trump supporters who have confidence in you? The one thing that we've got to have agencies in this country that are transcend politics, that have the confidence of independents, Democrats, Republicans, progressives, conservatives. Do you really believe that the majority of this country has confidence in you right now?
I believe that the country deserves answers, and I am committed to finding those answers and providing those answers.
Well, look, I believe, Director Cheatle, that you should resign. I think there are colleagues on both sides of the aisle who believe that, and I hope you'll consider it. I yield back.
Chair now recognizes Mr. Palmer from Alabama for 5 minutes.
Director Cheatle, did local law enforcement ESU teams have compromise authority to engage a perceived threat?
Yes.
Why do you think they didn't use it?
I believe that they follow the same use of force that our agency.
You don't, when you have compromise authority, you don't have to get permission if you perceive a threat. And there were not just the ESU units, but there were local law enforcement that had line of sight on the shooter before the shots were taken. So one of my questions is there was supposed to be a briefing with the Secret Service sniper units, your counter-assault team members, with the contract team, with the local ESU teams. That didn't take place. Why was that?
So I have been told that there has been a briefing. There was a briefing that took place.
I've been told that there wasn't one.
And again, we are still looking into the facts of the investigation. So
well, let me ask you this. When were you informed that there was a credible threat against President Trump, former President Trump? When did you learn of that?
Sir, the former president has a number of threats.
I didn't ask you that. There was a credible threat from Iran. When were you informed of that? Answer the question.
We have been monitoring the threats.
You knew before the rally, okay? All right? The site security plan is generally drafted by the site supervisor and the site agent, probably out of the Pittsburgh district office. Did they take into account the credible threat against President Trump?
Our personnel take into account the threats that are
Then
out
why
there.
would they leave a building? And I will correct the distance that's been quoted. It was about 140 yards with clear line of sight to the president. Why was that building not occupied on the roof? I mean, you could have put Barney Fife on the roof and kept somebody from getting up there. So why wasn't that done?
The plan that was developed that day encompassed a number of security mitigations.
The issue is the site supervisor, the site agent, and the special agent in charge, who I think signed off on the plan, did not include that in the inner perimeter, and they didn't have a plan to secure the building. As I understand it, the Butler County ESU unit was situated on the second floor of a building next to that, but they didn't have a clear line of sight of the roof. The angle was too severe. The photograph that was taken of the young man, of the shooter, when he had the rangefinder, was taken at 5:15. It wasn't until 5:38 that that photograph was transmitted to the Secret Service sniper units. I don't understand the lack of interoperability here in the communication process. I don't understand why people didn't perceive that as a credible threat. The video that Mr. Christopher Morphy had shown there was clearly a credible threat. So how is it that all of these mistakes could be made? How many explosive devices were found on or near the site?
Again, I would have to defer you to the FBI.
Madam, I believe they were in his car, and I think there might have been one near a main gas line. It wasn't just the fact that he had a rifle. It was the fact that he had the ability to inflict enormous harm, enormous numbers of casualties, had those devices exploded. I want to know also, when your agents conduct a site review, are they fully informed of all of the threats that are being made against the principle that they're protecting?
What I can tell you is that when our agents go out to conduct an advance, their whole goal is to ensure the safety and security.
I understand what their goal is. The failure to secure that building not only put the former president's life in danger, it put the lives of individuals in the crowd in danger as well. I mean, the Reagan shooting, there were other people shot at that time as well. And the Secret Service members' lives were in danger. So I don't understand how you can continue to stay in the position you're in when this was a failure of historic magnitude. 43 years without anything like this happening. And you failed, in this case, in a spectacular way. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes Mr. Mfume from Maryland.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to commend you and the ranking member on your joint statement and for holding this hearing that we might all at least attempt to try to get some answers. Some of us, Ms. Cheatle, grew up in an era not too unlike what we see today in terms of political violence. And some of us remember the November 22nd, 1963 assassination of President Kennedy. Some of us, like myself, remember 2 days later when Jack Ruby on live TV shot and killed Lee Harvey Oswald. We've seen over and over and over since that time these kind of attempts, whether it was the assassination of Martin Luther King or Bobby Kennedy, or the attempted attack on George Wallace in Laurel, Maryland, the shooting in 1981 of Ronald Reagan, our friend and colleague Steve Scalise shooting here in D.C., and the unfortunate attack on Paul Pelosi, and now this matter regarding former President Trump. Let me try, if I might, to take another walk at this. People just assume that whoever is in charge takes full responsibility when there's never been, at least on this magnitude and scale, this sort of failure. So when members ask you, are you going to resign, and you say you have no intention to, they are perplexed, like many people who watch what's going on. And there's some things I just don't understand. Why was the building, the ARG building, placed outside of the perimeter when clearly it was close enough for someone to launch an attack?
So again, sir, we are looking into all of the details of how the advance was comprised, but I can tell you that there was overwatch on that building provided that day.
By a drone?
I'm not going to get into the specifics of technology or assets that were used in
well,
this forum.
I think it's fair to say the overwatch failed. because the shooter got up on the roof and stayed there for a while, and people had pointed him out. So do you think that your overwatch was a failure in that case?
I think that we need to know the full details to understand how this occurred.
And why was the rooftop left naked to begin with? Can you tell us that, considering it was within the line of sight and so very close?
Again, I can't speak to the specifics of this particular event site, but what I can tell you is that when the Secret Service develops an advanced plan, they take into account a number of factors when they're building their advance. If there are buildings or areas of concern, and overwatch is one of those mitigations that they want to put in place, then they will cover off areas of responsibility.
I understand that, but the shooter came to the attention of your agency 52 minutes before the former president got to the stage. Did anybody get assigned to watch or cover that individual who had already been seen with a advanced finder on him and other suspicious matters? Was anybody assigned to track him?
So what I'd like to clarify is that a suspicious individual
I got that part.
was
It's
brought
not a threat.
to the attention
I know.
of our personnel. And again, having a rangefinder at an outdoor event.
Well, let me ask you this. When the suspicious person was brought to the attention of the Secret Service, was anybody in the detail ordered to follow and stay with that suspicious person just because they might become a threat?
So we have a number of teams that are on the ground. And again, we are trying to verify the timelines of when those notifications were made to our personnel so that they could assume the responsibility of trying to track that individual.
Ms. Cheatle, there has been a lot of discussion, some of which raised itself earlier in this hearing, about poor staff morale within your agency. And I have the July 17th report of Government Executive, which is a credible reporting service for the federal government, for employees. And the 2023 ranking of places to work within the federal government showed, and this is through the Office of Personnel Management, that the Secret Service came in 413th out of 459 sub-agencies and agencies. Can you explain that?
Certainly. What I can tell you is the Secret Service is a difficult job. It challenges our employees daily. It's holidays, it's weekends, it's no leave periods.
But Madam, people come to work knowing that. You do explain that when you hire somebody. They know that. It's the same with other agencies. They miss holidays, they come to work at odd hours. But to be one of the worst places to work within the federal government, 413 out of 459? I just need an explanation. What do you think as the director there?
I think that this
And that's the last question, but please answer Mr. Mfube's question.
I think that this is a challenging job. I think that it's a challenging environment to be in law enforcement, and we do have a no-fail mission, and our folks are tasked with that every day, 365 days of the year. But I can tell you I've also taken a number of measures since I've been the director to recruit and retain and stem the tide of attrition in our agency, which will hopefully alleviate some of that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chair now recognizes Mr. Sessions from Texas.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. I join in the calls of all of our members to say thank you for doing this hearing on a bipartisan basis. Director, I'm not going to sit here and say you ought to resign, but I am going to say that you have not given us confidence that you have the ability to understand what happened, to take the responsibility in terms of understanding. You've spent a number of years. How many years do you say you've been with the agency?
29.
Well, I spent 16 years with AT&T, moved 7 times with them, and had a really good feel about their operations, how they worked, what was acceptable, who was responsible. And I've heard you say today numbers of times, well, you've got to wait. Well, you've got to wait. Wait for the final report. When is the final going to happen? I mean, how long do we have to wait before you can give us credible answers? You've been there 28 years. You've had a few days to be able to draw your own analysis of this. You should understand the entire process. You talked about being on the team, perhaps in Georgia. You have talked about your experience in this. You've talked about the professional nature of the agency. That I don't doubt. But the director, just like it was when I ran my operations at AT&T, was responsible for making sure they worked. And in business, it either works or it doesn't work. There's no in between. It either works or it does not work. And your job as the, in essence, administrator, the director, is to make sure it looks right and works. And I've not heard you say one thing about my analysis is, I have asked these questions. It's always, I've got to sit back and wait for someone else to decide that. So I'm going to ask you a question.